May 19th, 1944. 200 miles north of Bougainville Island, Solomon Sea. Lieutenant Commander Walton Pendleton stood at the sonar station aboard USS England, watching his operator adjust the gain controls, while listening for the distinctive metallic ping that meant contact. Through the bridge windows, he could see the calm Pacific stretching endlessly under a crystalline morning sky. His destroyer Escort and her two sister ships had been hunting for 36 hours, sweeping back and forth in a coordinated search pattern, waiting for intelligence to prove accurate. Then, at 13:35 hours, it happened. The sonar operator's hand shot up. Contact. Bearing 045 degrees. Range 2,000 yards. What the Japanese submarine I-16 could not know, was that the destroyer Escort tracking her carried a weapon that had fundamentally changed the mathematics of submarine warfare. Not through superior explosives or deeper settings or faster ships, but through a simple, almost absurdly simple principle that conventional naval doctrine had overlooked for decades. Fire ahead. Fire while you can still see your target. Fire before the blind period begins. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The weapon mounted on England's foredeck looked like the quills of some mechanical hedgehog, 24 launching spigots arranged in neat rows pointing skyward. In the next 98 minutes, those spigots would fire 5 separate salvos. The fifth would send I-16 to the bottom with all hands, taking with her a cargo of rice meant for starving Japanese troops, and beginning a 12-day streak of submarine kills that would never be matched in the history of anti-submarine warfare. But to understand why USS England's hedgehog attacks represented such a devastating tactical revolution, you must first understand what American and British destroyer crews faced before February 1942, and why the problem of killing submarines had become so desperately, frustratingly, maddeningly difficult. In November 1941, when Captain Frederick Walker of the Royal Navy took command of HMS Stork and began developing hunter-killer tactics in the western approaches, the fundamental weapon against submarines remained exactly what it had been in the First World War. The depth charge. A barrel of explosives dropped off the stern, preset to detonate at a specific depth, relying on hydrostatic shock to crack pressure hulls or force submarines to the surface. The tactical problem was brutal in its simplicity. To attack a submarine with depth charges, a destroyer had to pass directly over the target. The moment that happened, sonar contact was lost. ASDIC, as the British called their sonar, or sonar as the Americans termed it, could only scan ahead of the attacking vessel. Once a destroyer reached the point where it needed to drop depth charges, the submarine disappeared from detection. The attacking ship went blind at the exact moment when precision mattered most. This created what submariners called the dead period, those critical seconds, sometimes stretching to minutes, when the hunted could change course, change depth, change speed, without the hunter knowing. Experienced submarine commanders understood the timing perfectly. They counted the seconds from contact loss to the expected moment of depth charge release. Just before that moment, they ordered emergency turns, steep angle changes, anything to put their boats somewhere other than where the destroyer captain expected them to be. The German U-boat commanders became masters of this technique. Kapitanleutnants, who survived repeated depth charge attacks, described it as a deadly game of blind chess. You heard the destroyer's propellers overhead, growing louder. You felt the pressure waves as the massive hull passed directly above your boat. Then came the wait, the terrible wait, listening to depth charges tumbling down through the water column, wondering if your evasive maneuver had been enough. Statistics from early 1942 painted a bleak picture. Of all British depth charge attacks during that period, only 3% resulted in confirmed submarine kills. 3%. For every 100 attacks, 97 U-boats escaped. Even 5 consecutive attacks on the same target raised the kill probability to merely 10%. The numbers were unsustainable given the rate at which German shipyards were launching new submarines. The Americans faced similar frustrations in the Pacific. Japanese submarine tactics emphasized radical, evasive maneuvers and deep diving. The Type 95 depth charge used by the U.S. Navy in early 1942 could only be set to maximum depth of 300 feet. Japanese submarines routinely dove to 500 feet or deeper when under attack, putting them safely below the effective range of American depth charges. Destroyer crews could hear their quarry on sonar, could track the submarine's movements, but lacked any weapon that could reach the target. The problem extended beyond mere depth settings. Each depth charge explosion created massive turbulence in the water, sound waves scattered in chaotic patterns, false echoes multiplied. Sonar operators found their screens filled with interference that could last 15 minutes or longer. During that period, submarines could travel significant distances in any direction. By the time the water settled enough for effective sonar operation, the target had vanished. British and American naval planners recognized the crisis. German U-boats were sinking merchant ships faster than Allied shipyards could replace them. In the first 6 months of 1942 alone, U-boats sank over 3 million tons of Allied shipping in the Atlantic. The Battle of the Atlantic was being lost. Unless anti-submarine weapons improved dramatically, the war itself might be lost. The solution came from an unlikely source: the Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development. Nicknamed the Wheezers and Dodgers because it was staffed largely by retired officers and civilian engineers recalled to service. Located in a requisitioned hotel in London, this department had a mandate to develop unconventional weapons using unconventional thinking. In 1941, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Blacker brought the department a weapon design he had developed during the interwar period: the spigot mortar. Unlike conventional artillery that used a barrel, Blacker's design launched projectiles from a steel rod or spigot. The propellant charge sat inside a hollow tail on the projectile itself. When fired, the explosion drove the projectile forward off the spigot, while the spigot absorbed the recoil. The system had one enormous advantage: a single spigot launcher could fire projectiles of vastly different sizes and weights. You didn't need to match the projectile to a specific caliber barrel. This made the system extraordinarily flexible for field modifications. The Directorate saw potential, not for the original purpose Blacker had envisioned, but for something entirely different: an anti-submarine weapon that could fire ahead of the attacking ship, a weapon that would allow destroyers to maintain sonar contact throughout the entire attack, a weapon that would eliminate the dead period. The concept was revolutionary yet obvious once stated. Instead of dropping charges off the stern after passing over the submarine, launch them forward before reaching the target. Fire them while the submarine remains in sonar contact. Give the attacking crew those extra precious seconds to adjust aim based on real-time information about target depth, speed, and bearing. The Directorate adapted Blacker's spigot mortar design into a forward-throwing anti-submarine projector. 24 launching spigots arranged in 4 rows of 6. Each spigot would fire a finned projectile carrying 35 pounds of Torpex explosive. The spigots were angled, so the projectiles would land in an elliptical pattern, approximately 130 feet in diameter, about 200 yards ahead of the attacking ship. The firing sequence was staggered by tenths of a second, so all 24 projectiles would land nearly simultaneously. This minimized stress on the mounting, allowing the weapon to be installed on ships without major structural reinforcement. More importantly, it created a concentrated pattern of potential strikes rather than scattered individual shots. The projectiles used contact fuses rather than depth or time fuses. They would only explode if they struck something solid, a submarine hull. If all 24 missed, they would sink harmlessly to the ocean floor without detonating. This single design choice made the weapon tactically transformative. No explosions meant no water turbulence. No turbulence meant sonar remained effective. Crews could immediately assess whether they had achieved a hit or needed to reload and attack again. The development team calculated the mathematics carefully. Each projectile weighed 65 pounds total. After launch, it would arc through the air and strike the water nose first. The projectile would then sink at approximately 23 feet per second. That meant a submarine at 200 feet depth would be reached in under 9 seconds. Under 9 seconds. Compare that to conventional depth charges, which sank at 7 to 9 feet per second, depending on type. The Hedgehog projectiles reached target depth in half the time or less, giving submarines far less opportunity to evade. The weapon was named for its appearance. With all 24 spigots loaded, the launcher resembled a bristling hedgehog. The name stuck. HMS Escort, an aging W-class destroyer from the First World War, received the first operational Hedgehog installation in August 1941. The trials took place in Liverpool Bay against known wrecks on the seafloor. Engineers and weapons designers watched the firings, adjusted timing sequences, modified propellant charges, and gradually refined the system into a reliable weapon. On February 2, 1942, Escort was escorting a convoy southwest of the Azores when sonar detected German submarine U-581. The U-boat captain attempted to torpedo the destroyers, but suffered a technical malfunction that forced his submarine to the surface prematurely. Escort rammed U-581, sending the German boat to the bottom. Historical accounts differ on whether Hedgehog projectiles contributed to the kill. Some sources credit the ramming alone. Others suggest Hedgehog strikes damaged the submarine before the ramming. What remains undisputed is that Escort, carrying the world's first operational Hedgehog installation, had achieved the first destruction of an enemy submarine by any ship equipped with the weapon. Production accelerated through 1942. By December, over 100 Royal Navy ships carried Hedgehog installations. American naval observers studied the weapon with intense interest. The United States Navy faced its own submarine crisis in the Pacific, where Japanese submarines were attacking supply convoys and American anti-submarine weapons were proving inadequate. In late 1942, under a reverse Lend-Lease arrangement, the British provided complete Hedgehog specifications to the United States. American manufacturers began producing Mark X and Mark XI versions, adapted for U.S. Navy electrical systems and mounting requirements, but fundamentally identical to the British design. The weapon entered American service just as the Pacific War reached a critical phase. Japanese naval aviation had been bloodied at Midway but remained dangerous. Japanese submarines continued operating aggressively, attacking supply lines and attempting to intercept American carrier groups. The Imperial Japanese Navy needed its submarines to survive. They needed intelligence on American fleet movements. They needed to maintain pressure on Allied logistics. By mid-1943, Hedgehog installations were becoming standard equipment on American destroyer escorts. These ships, smaller than fleet destroyers but specifically designed for anti-submarine warfare, received the weapon as primary armament alongside conventional depth charges. One such ship was USS England, DE 635, a Buckley-class destroyer escort commissioned in December 1943. England was named for Ensign John Charles. England, killed aboard USS Oklahoma during the Pearl Harbor attack. The ship displaced 1,673 tons, stretched 306 feet in length, and could make 23 knots on turbo-electric drive. Her armament included 3 3-inch guns, multiple anti-aircraft weapons, depth charge racks, K-gun projectors, and 1 Hedgehog mounting on the foredeck. More importantly, England had a crew obsessed with training. Her commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Walton Pendleton, was a reserved, methodical officer who had commanded sub-chasers before receiving England. He understood anti-submarine warfare as few destroyer escort captains did. He drilled his crew relentlessly on every aspect of submarine hunting, from sonar operation to weapons coordination to engine control. The Hedgehog gunners practiced loading and firing procedures until they could complete the entire sequence in darkness by touch alone. The sonar operators spent hours tracking practice targets, learning to distinguish real contacts from false echoes, memorizing the acoustic signatures of different submarine types. The bridge team worked on station keeping and approach tactics. Everyone understood that submarine hunting required the entire crew working as a synchronized unit. By early 1944, combat statistics were beginning to show the Hedgehog's effectiveness. British figures indicated that out of 5,174 depth charge attacks, there were 85.5 kills, a ratio of 60.5 attacks per kill. By comparison, Hedgehog attacks showed 268 attacks for 47 kills, a ratio of 5.7 attacks per kill. The Hedgehog was more than 10 times as effective as depth charges. The reasons were clear. Contact fuses meant every explosion indicated a hit. Lack of water turbulence meant immediate damage assessment and opportunity for follow-up attacks. Forward firing meant maintained sonar contact. Faster sink rate meant reduced evasion time. Each advantage compounded the others, creating a weapon system that fundamentally altered the tactical balance between hunter and hunted. But statistics captured only part of the story. What the numbers could not convey was the psychological impact. Submarine commanders who survived Hedgehog attacks described a new kind of terror. With conventional depth charges, you heard them coming. You felt the successive detonations, sometimes dozens in a single attack pattern, and you knew that as long as your hull remained intact, you had a chance. The explosions told you the destroyer was attacking blindly, hoping to get close enough. Hedgehog was different. Hedgehog was silent. No explosions meant the projectiles had missed, which meant the destroyer still had you on sonar, which meant they could reload and attack again, and again, and again, until they got it right. When Hedgehog projectiles did strike home, there was no progressive damage. The 35 pounds of Torpex would crack open the pressure hull instantly. You died in seconds, drowned by the sudden massive influx of seawater at depth, or killed by the explosive force itself. For destroyer crews, the weapon's psychological impact was equally profound, but reversed. With depth charges, you never knew if you had achieved a kill until oil and debris rose to the surface, sometimes hours after the attack. Dropped your entire load, exhausted your ammunition, and then waited, hoping. The uncertainty was maddening. Hedgehog removed that uncertainty. If you heard explosions, you had hits. If you heard nothing, you had missed, but you still had your target on sonar and could attack again. This immediate feedback created a sense of control that depth charges never provided. Crews gained confidence. Training paid visible dividends. Good sonar operators and skilled attackers could see the results of their work in real time. By May 1944, USS England had completed her shakedown training and several convoy escort missions between Guadalcanal, Espiritu Santo, and Noumea. The crew had not yet engaged an enemy submarine in combat. That was about to change in a manner that would make England the most celebrated submarine killer in naval history. On May 13, 1944, American codebreakers at Fleet Radio Unit Pacific intercepted and decoded a Japanese transmission. Submarine I-16 had departed Truk Island carrying supplies, specifically rice, in 75-pound rubber bags, for the isolated Japanese garrison at Buin on southern Bougainville. The transmission included the submarine's intended route and approximate schedule. 3 destroyer escorts received orders to intercept. USS England, USS Raby, and USS George formed Escort Division 39 under Commander Hamilton Haynes aboard Raby. The 3 ships departed Purvis Bay on the afternoon of May 18th and proceeded to the intercept zone 200 miles north of Bougainville. The morning of May 19th was calm and clear. Visibility extended for miles across water smooth as polished glass. At 13:35 hours, England's sonar operator detected a submerged contact, bearing 045 degrees, range 2,000 yards. The contact exhibited the acoustic characteristics of a large submarine maintaining depth and proceeding on a steady course. The operator's assessment. This was I-16. I-16 was a Kaidai-class submarine, one of Japan's largest, displacing 2,550 tons submerged. She measured 358 feet in length and could dive to depths of 250 feet. Her crew numbered 94 officers and men. She carried 8 21-inch torpedo tubes and had completed 9 war patrols, plus multiple resupply missions to isolated garrisons. Commander Takeuchi Yoshitaka, I-16's captain, knew the waters well. He had successfully delivered supplies to Buin before. His submarine was fully capable of evading surface vessels if detected. Japanese submarine doctrine emphasized radical evasive maneuvers, using speed and depth changes to break sonar contact, then slipping away during the confusion that depth charge explosions created. What Takeuchi did not know could not have known was that the destroyer Escort tracking his submarine carried a weapon specifically designed to eliminate every evasive advantage Japanese submarine tactics relied upon. England commenced her approach at 1340 hours. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Lieutenant Commander Pendleton ordered 15 knots, speed calculated to minimize propeller noise while maintaining sonar contact. The sonar operator called out bearing and range updates every 30 seconds. The target maintained depth at approximately 130 feet, proceeding on course 270 degrees. At 1341 hours, England fired her first Hedgehog salvo. 24 projectiles arced into the air, traveling 200 yards forward before splashing into the calm water. They sank rapidly, reaching target depth in under 9 seconds. The crew waited, listening. No explosions. Miss. The projectiles had fallen in a pattern centered where sonar indicated the target would be, but I-16 had maneuvered just enough to avoid them. Pendleton ordered immediate reload. The Hedgehog gunners worked with practiced efficiency, inserting fresh projectiles onto the spigots, checking firing circuits, reporting ready for action. Time from first shot to ready for second attack, less than 4 minutes. Throughout this period, sonar maintained continuous contact. I-16 remained visible. The second attack at 1346 hours scored 1 hit. A single muffled explosion reached England's hull through the water. 1 projectile out of 24 had struck I-16's pressure hull. 35 pounds of Torpex detonated on contact. The explosion would have been devastating, but not immediately fatal. Japanese submarines were heavily built, with robust internal compartmentation. One breach could be managed through damage control if the crew acted quickly. Commander Takeuchi did exactly that. He ordered emergency deep diving and radical course change, trying to break contact while his damage control teams worked to shore up the breach. I-16 dove toward 300 feet, pushing beyond her test depth, accepting the risk of structural failure to escape her attacker. Pendleton tracked the maneuver, using fathometer readings and sonar data. At 1410 hours, England fired her third Hedgehog salvo, aiming for where sonar indicated I-16 should be at 325 feet depth. But the targeting data was imprecise. The fathometer reading taken after the attack revealed I-16 had actually been at 325 feet, while the Hedgehog pattern had been calculated for 200 feet. Complete miss. I-16 executed another radical evasive maneuver, turning hard to port and increasing speed. The submarine's electric motors were running at maximum output, draining batteries but providing the speed necessary for evasion. For 93 minutes, I-16 had successfully avoided destruction through skillful maneuvers and depth changes. At 1420 hours, England fired her fourth salvo. Again, I-16's captain timed his evasion perfectly. The Hedgehog projectiles fell through empty water, no hits, but I-16 was trapped. The submarine had expended enormous battery power on high-speed maneuvering and depth changes. Her hull had been breached by the one hit from the second attack. Damage control teams were working frantically, but the submarine was taking on water. More critically, she could not surface. 3 destroyer escorts remained overhead, maintaining perfect sonar contact. The dead period that Japanese submarine doctrine relied upon did not exist. The Hedgehog eliminated it. At 1433 hours, Lieutenant Commander Pendleton fired England's 5th Hedgehog salvo. This time, the targeting solution was perfect. 4 to 6 projectiles struck I-16's hull nearly simultaneously. The combined explosive force of 140 to 210 pounds of Torpex ripped through the submarine's pressure hull at 325 feet depth. The explosion was massive. It lifted England's fantail clear of the water. Men standing on the deck were knocked off their feet. Through the hull, the crew heard the unmistakable sounds of a submarine breaking apart, bulkheads collapsing, machinery tearing loose, the screech of metal under impossible strain. 20 minutes later, debris began rising to the surface. Pieces of wooden decking, rubber rice bags, personal effects, oil. By the following morning, A 3x6 nautical mile oil slick marked where I-16 had died. 94 Japanese submariners were gone. The rice they carried would never reach the starving garrison at Bougainville. USS England had achieved her first kill. But this was merely the beginning. In the waters north of the Admiralty Islands, the Imperial Japanese Navy had positioned 7 more submarines in a carefully planned patrol line. They were waiting to intercept American carriers. American codebreakers had intercepted the operational orders, and USS England was going hunting. On May 20th, 1944, American codebreakers decoded another Japanese transmission. This one revealed operational orders for Admiral Soimu Toyoda's carefully constructed submarine trap. 7 boats from the 7th Submarine Squadron, RO-104, RO-105, RO-106, RO-108, RO-109, RO-112, and RO-116 were forming a patrol line north of the Admiralty Islands, positioned to detect and report any American carrier movements. The strategic context was critical. Toyoda commanded the combined fleet from his headquarters and needed advance warning of American intentions. Would the next offensive strike the Marianas, the Palau Islands, the Philippines? His surface fleet, concentrated at Tawi-Tawi, carried only enough fuel for one decisive engagement. He could not afford to sortie toward the wrong target. The submarine picket line would provide the intelligence he needed. What Toyoda did not anticipate was that American intelligence had compromised his entire operation. Every submarine's position, every scheduled radio transmission, every movement order existed in decoded form at Fleet Radio Unit Pacific before the submarines themselves received the messages. The hunters had become the hunted. England, Raby, and George received orders to destroy the picket line. Commander Haynes, the Escort Division commander, understood the tactical opportunity. 7 submarines deployed in known positions, following predictable patrol patterns, maintaining radio schedules. It was a submarine killer's dream scenario. The 3 destroyer escorts formed a scouting line, separated by 16,000 yards, sweeping north from Bougainville toward the Admiralty Islands. At 0350 hours on May 22nd, George's radar detected a surface contact at 8 miles, a submarine running on diesels to charge batteries. George illuminated the target with searchlights. Row 106 crash-dived immediately. George closed for a hedgehog attack, but the approach angle was poor. Row 106 executed emergency evasion maneuvers, turning hard and going deep. George lost contact. At 0425 hours, England regained sonar contact. Row 106 was running deep, trying to slip away in the confusion. But there was no confusion. Hedgehog attacks produced no water turbulence. The ocean remained acoustically clear. England tracked her target with precision. Lieutenant Commander Pendleton calculated his approach. The submarine was turning to port, probably attempting to come around for a torpedo shot. Japanese submarine commanders were aggressive. Some believed American destroyer escorts were less capable than fleet destroyers and could be engaged successfully. Row 106's captain was making that fatal assumption. At 0501 hours, England fired. The Hedgehog salvo arced ahead, splashed down, and sank rapidly. At least 3 projectiles struck RO 106's hull. The contact fuses detonated on impact. Through England's sonar, the crew heard a large underwater explosion as RO 106's internal fuel tanks or battery compartment ruptured. The submarine broke apart and sank. 49 Japanese submariners died. After sunrise, a heavy oil slick and floating debris confirmed the kill. England had sunk her 2nd submarine in 3 days. The crew was beginning to understand that their training, their weapon, and their tactical doctrine formed an almost perfect system for submarine destruction. The 3 destroyer escorts continued their sweep. On May 23rd, at 0600 hours, Raby detected RO 104 on radar. This was Lieutenant Hisashi Izubuchi's boat, a veteran submarine that had operated in the Aleutians before transferring to the South Pacific. Row 104 had once rescued 75 survivors from the cruiser Sendai after a night surface action off Bougainville. Her crew was experienced and her captain skilled. Raby gained sonar contact at 0610 and commenced a series of hedgehog attacks. First attack at 0617. Miss. Second attack. Miss. Third attack. Miss. Fourth attack. Miss. Row 104's captain was executing textbook evasion, using every trick Japanese submarine doctrine taught. 4 times he anticipated the attack pattern and maneuvered his submarine clear. At 0717 hours, George joined the attack. First salvo miss, second salvo at 0730, miss, third salvo, miss, fourth salvo, miss, fifth salvo at 0810, miss. 9 consecutive hedgehog attacks had failed to score a single hit. The submarine's captain had read the tactical situation perfectly, anticipating each attack and evading successfully. Commander Haynes radioed England to hold position. His own ship and George had expended multiple salvos. Someone needed to succeed. The attacks continued. George fired again and missed. Then again and missed. 11 attacks total. Row 104 remained intact. At 0824 hours, Lieutenant Commander Pendleton requested permission to attack. He had studied the sonar tracks carefully. He understood RO 104's evasion pattern. The Japanese captain was favoring hard turns to port combined with depth changes. Pendleton could account for that. Commander Haynes must have been frustrated beyond measure. 2 ships, 11 attacks, 0 hits. But he gave the order. England moved into attack position. Pendleton's approach was methodical. He tracked RO 104 for several minutes, watching the submarine's movements, calculating the evasion pattern. At 0834 hours, he fired England's first hedgehog salvo. Miss. The projectiles fell through empty water as RO 104 executed another port turn. Pendleton made adjustment calculations. The submarine's captain had established a rhythm. Hard port turn, level out, brief straight run, then another turn. The timing was predictable, if you watched long enough. At 0834 hours, Pendleton fired England's second salvo, aiming not at where RO 104 was, but where she would be when the projectiles reached depth. The tactical solution was perfect. 10 to 12 hedgehog. Projectiles struck RO 104's hull. The combined explosive force tore the submarine apart. 3 minutes later, a massive underwater explosion marked RO 104's final destruction as her internal compartments collapsed under pressure. Debris and oil appeared on the surface at 10:45 hours. England had sunk her 3rd submarine in 4 days. The crew was beginning to realize they were participating in something extraordinary. This was not routine anti-submarine patrol. This was systematic destruction of an entire enemy submarine squadron. The 3 destroyer escorts continued sweeping north. At 0120 hours on May 24th, George's radar detected another surface contact. RO 116, commanded by Lieutenant Junior Grade Yoshimura Teruo, was charging batteries. George illuminated the submarine with searchlights. Row 116 dove immediately. At 0150 hours, England gained sonar contact. Row 116 was proceeding on course 350 degrees at depth. Pendleton commenced his approach, bringing England to within striking range while maintaining perfect sonar track. At 0214 hours, he fired 1 hedgehog salvo. 3 to 5 projectiles struck RO 116's pressure hull. The submarine began breaking up immediately. Unlike previous kills where massive secondary explosions indicated catastrophic internal damage, Row 116 died more quietly. The hedgehog strikes had cracked her hull open, and she flooded rapidly, sinking to crush depth where water pressure finished the job. Breaking up noises continued for several minutes, as compartments collapsed sequentially. After sunrise at 0702 hours, a small quantity of oil and debris confirmed the kill. By the following day, the oil slick had expanded to cover several square miles. Row 116 and her crew of 56 were gone. England had now sunk 4 submarines in 6 days. The statistical improbability was staggering. 4 submarines, 6 days, 4 different hedgehog attacks, 4 kills. This was anti-submarine warfare elevated to a level of effectiveness that pre-war naval planners would have considered fantasy. But USS England was not finished. A hunter-killer group relieved Escort Division 39 on May 25, taking over the sweep of the remaining submarine patrol stations. The group consisted of escort carrier Hogat Bay and 4 Fletcher-class destroyers. They were to handle RO-108, which intelligence indicated was operating in the area. At 23:04 hours on May 26, the destroyers detected RO-108 on the surface. The submarine dove and evaded the initial attacks. For 25 hours, the hunter-killer group pursued RO-108, firing over 20 Hedgehog salvos from multiple ships. All missed. RO-108's commander was proving as skilled as RO-104's captain had been, evading attack after attack through radical maneuvers and perfect timing. Commander Haynes watched the futile attacks for 25 hours. His 3 destroyer escorts had been detached from the hunter-killer group and were proceeding independently, but they remained within radio range. At 01:04 hours, on May 28, Haynes radioed the hunter-killer group commander and requested permission to send England to assist. The request must have been galling to the destroyer captains who had been attacking RO-108 unsuccessfully for over a day. A destroyer escort, smaller and theoretically less capable than fleet destroyers, was being called in to finish a job the bigger ships could not complete. But the hunter-killer group commander granted permission. RO-108 had to be sunk. England closed on the target at 23:30 hours. Pendleton's sonar operator gained contact immediately. RO-108 was maneuvering at approximately 250 feet depth, still attempting to evade. The Japanese captain had been under continuous attack for 25 hours. His crew was exhausted. His batteries were depleted. But he remained dangerous and determined. At 23:23 hours, Pendleton fired a single Hedgehog salvo. This would be England's final attack of the patrol. The ship had only 24 projectiles remaining, exactly 1 full load. If this attack missed, there would be no second chance. The Hedgehog projectiles struck RO-108 directly. Multiple explosions, followed by the sounds of catastrophic hull failure. RO-108 broke apart and sank with all 58 crew members. The time from England's arrival to final destruction, 19 minutes. USS England had achieved what no warship in history had ever accomplished. 5 enemy submarines sunk in 6 days. I-16 on May 19th, RO-106 on May 22nd, RO-104 on May 23rd, RO-116 on May 24th, RO-108 on May 28th. 5 submarines, 6 days, using 1 weapon system, Hedgehog. On May 30th, Commander Haynes relieved England and George, sending them to Manus Island to rearm and rest. The 2 destroyer escorts were to rendezvous with Raby and then return to hunting operations. But before they could depart Manus, another submarine contact developed. Fleet intelligence decoded Japanese transmissions, indicating RO-105 was proceeding toward a patrol station near the Admiralties. A hunter-killer group was pursuing, but having difficulty maintaining contact. Commander Haynes requested and received permission to rejoin the hunt with his 3 destroyer escorts. At 0700 hours on May 31st, England detected RO-105 on sonar. The submarine was proceeding at depth, unaware that American forces had compromised the entire Japanese submarine deployment. Commander Haynes made a decision. His other 2 ships would conduct the attacks. England had achieved 5 kills. Give other crews the opportunity. George and Raby made multiple Hedgehog attacks over the next several hours. Every attack missed. RO-105's captain was executing expert evasion maneuvers, turning at precisely the right moments, changing depth, unexpectedly, exploiting every tactical advantage. The attacks continued through the day and into the evening. By 0700 hours on June 1st, George and Raby had fired over 20 Hedgehog salvos. 0 hits. Commander Haynes radioed England. The message was brief and profane. "Oh, hell. Go ahead, England." At 0736 hours, Lieutenant Commander Pendleton fired one Hedgehog salvo. 6 to 10 projectiles struck RO-105's hull. A major explosion followed 5 minutes later at 0741 hours as the submarine's internal compartments ruptured. Oil and debris fountained to the surface. Row 105 was destroyed with all hands. USS England had sunk 6 submarines in 12 days. The achievement was unprecedented. No warship before or since has matched this record. Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, sent a message to England's crew. There'll always be an England in the United States Navy. The promise was kept. When a guided missile frigate was commissioned in 1960, she received the name England in honor of DE 635's extraordinary service. The tactical revolution that Hedgehog represented can be measured in multiple dimensions. Statistically, British figures showed depth charges achieved 1 kill per 60 attacks. Hedgehog achieved 1 kill per 6 attacks, a tenfold improvement in effectiveness. American figures from mid-1944 showed 8% kill rate per Hedgehog pattern, rising to 10% by mid-1945. But statistics alone cannot capture the weapon's impact. The Hedgehog fundamentally altered submarine warfare by eliminating the blind period. By maintaining sonar contact throughout the attack, destroyer crews retained initiative and control. Submarines could no longer exploit the dead time between contact loss and weapon arrival. The hunter remained informed. The hunted could not hide. The psychological impact extended beyond individual engagements. Admiral Toyoda's submarine, picket line, was designed to provide advance warning of American fleet movements. Instead, it provided target practice for a single destroyer escort. 7 submarines deployed. 6 submarines sunk. The 7th, RO-109, survived only because she was recalled before England could engage her. The loss of 6 submarines in 12 days convinced Toyoda that American submarines had penetrated his defensive screen and that Manus Island would be the launching point for the next American offensive. He committed his fleet to defend the Palau Islands. He was wrong. On June 15, 1944, American forces invaded Saipan in the Marianas. Toyoda's fleet was out of position, low on fuel, and unable to respond effectively. The Battle of the Philippine Sea that followed was a catastrophe for Japanese naval aviation. American fighters and anti-aircraft fire destroyed nearly 500 Japanese aircraft in what American pilots called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Japanese carrier aviation, the sword of Pearl Harbor and the Indian Ocean raids, was broken forever. American submarines sank 2 Japanese fleet carriers during the battle. The remaining carrier air groups were decimated. USS England's destruction of the submarine picket line contributed directly to this strategic outcome. Toyoda's intelligence network was compromised by code breaking. His submarine screen was eliminated by Hedgehog attacks. His fleet sortied toward the wrong objective and arrived at the critical battle with degraded capabilities. The tactical innovation aboard a single destroyer escort had influenced fleet-level outcomes. The Hedgehog's effectiveness came from multiple compounding advantages. Contact fuses that only detonated on direct hits meant no wasted explosions and no water turbulence. Forward firing meant maintained sonar contact throughout the attack. Faster sink rate than depth charges, approximately 23 feet per second versus 7 to 9 feet per second, meant reduced evasion time for submarines. Pattern firing of 24 projectiles created multiple simultaneous impact points. Each advantage multiplied the others. For submarine crews, the weapon created a new terror. Depth charge attacks were violent and frightening, but you knew when the hunter was attacking blindly. Dozens of explosions meant the destroyer was guessing, hoping to get close enough. You could count the detonations, feel the hull flex with each pressure wave, and know that survival was possible if your compartmentation held. Hedgehog was different. Silence meant you were still being tracked. No explosions meant they could attack again. When Hedgehog projectiles did strike, death was instant. 35 pounds of Torpex detonating directly against the pressure hull at depth would crack it open immediately. No time for damage control, no time for emergency surfacing, just sudden catastrophic flooding and death within seconds. German U-boat commanders who survived Hedgehog attacks reported the psychological strain was worse than depth charging. You could not hear the projectiles coming. You had no warning. One moment you were evading successfully, the next moment your boat was breaking apart. Some U-boat captains began surrendering rather than face Hedgehog-equipped escorts. In the Pacific, Japanese submarine doctrine never adequately adapted to the Hedgehog threat. Japanese submarines continued using evasion tactics designed for depth charge attacks, hard turns, depth changes, using the blind period to escape. But Hedgehog eliminated the blind period. The evasion tactics that had proven successful against conventional weapons became predictable patterns that skilled sonar operators could track and skilled captains could exploit. USS England's success was not solely due to the weapon. The crew's training was extraordinary. Lieutenant Commander Pendleton drilled his men relentlessly on every aspect of submarine hunting. Sonar operators learned to distinguish real contacts from false echoes, to track targets through thermal layers and density gradients. Bridge teams practiced approach tactics until station keeping became instinctive. Gun crews loaded and fired Hedgehog salvos in darkness, rain, rough seas, any condition that might occur during actual combat. The Hedgehog gunners were particularly impressive, loading 24 65-pound projectiles onto the Spigot launcher, checking each firing circuit, preparing for coordinated salvos, all while the ship maneuvered at speed and the target submarine executed evasion maneuvers. The gunners had to work fast, work accurately, and work as a team. England's Hedgehog crews could reload and fire in under 3 minutes from the previous salvo. That speed often proved decisive. But training and weapons alone do not explain 6 kills in 12 days. Pendleton had something else, an intuitive understanding of submarine tactics, the ability to read a sonar track and understand what the enemy captain was thinking. After watching RO-104 evade 11 consecutive Hedgehog attacks from 2 other ships, Pendleton studied the pattern, identified the rhythm, and achieved a kill on his second attack. That was not luck. That was skill refined through preparation and applied with precision. The strategic impact of Hedgehog extended throughout the Pacific War. From mid-1944 onward, destroyer escorts equipped with Hedgehog sank Japanese submarines with increasing efficiency. USS Bengal sank RO-111 inches June. USS Burden Hastings destroyed RO-44. USS William Miller killed I-6. USS Wyman sank RO-48 and collaborated with USS Reynolds to destroy I-55. The kills accumulated. Japanese submarine operations became increasingly cautious. Submarines that had once attacked American carriers and transports aggressively now operated with extreme wariness. The patrol lines that had provided intelligence on American fleet movements were abandoned as too dangerous. Submarine commanders who knew about Hedgehog-equipped escorts tried to avoid engagement entirely. This degraded Japanese submarine effectiveness across multiple dimensions. Submarines that avoided combat could not sink American ships. Submarines that refused to patrol aggressively could not gather intelligence. The Imperial Japanese Navy's submarine force, which had begun the war with some of the most capable boats and most experienced crews in the world, ended the war, contributing almost nothing to Japan's defense. By contrast, American submarines devastated Japanese merchant shipping. American submarines sank 5.3 million tons of Japanese ships during the war, 55% of all Japanese maritime losses. American submarines hunted Japanese warships, sinking carriers, battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. American submarines conducted reconnaissance, rescued downed pilots, inserted commandos, and gathered intelligence. The difference in effectiveness came partly from better American submarines, better torpedoes, better training, but it also came from American surface forces being better at protecting convoys and hunting enemy submarines. Hedgehog was central to that capability. Japanese submarines attempting to attack American convoys faced destroyer escorts that could track them continuously and kill them efficiently. The risk-reward ratio became unacceptable. USS England continued operations through the summer of 1944. She provided escort services throughout the Northern Solomons, protecting supply convoys and supporting base construction. On October 18, 1944, while supporting the invasion of Leyte in the Philippines, England came under attack by a Japanese aircraft. The aircraft crashed into her stern in a deliberate kamikaze attack. The explosion killed 37 crew members and wounded 25 others. England survived but required extensive repairs. She returned to service in 1945 for final operations, before the Japanese surrender. The ship received the Presidential Unit Citation, awarded to the entire crew for extraordinary heroism in action. Lieutenant Commander Pendleton received the Navy Cross. England accumulated 4 battle stars for her service in the Pacific. She was decommissioned in 1946 and eventually scrapped, but her name lived on. The Hedgehog remained in service with the United States Navy into the 1950s and 60s, eventually being replaced by more advanced weapons like ASROC. The Soviet Union copied the design, creating the MBU 200 inches 1949. The British developed improved versions including squid and limbo mortars. The fundamental principle, forward-firing, contact-fused anti-submarine weapons, remained valid for decades. The tactical revolution that Hedgehog represented transformed anti-submarine warfare from a frustrating, low-probability activity into a precise, effective operation. Before Hedgehog, submarines held significant advantage over surface hunters. The blind period, the dead time, gave submarines opportunities to escape even when detected. After Hedgehog, that advantage disappeared. Hunters could maintain contact and attack repeatedly until achieving kills. USS England's achievement, 6 submarines in 12 days, demonstrated the weapon's potential when combined with skilled crews and good intelligence. No other warship ever matched that record because the opportunity never arose again under similar circumstances. But England proved what was possible. She showed that anti-submarine warfare could be conducted with devastating efficiency when doctrine, weapons, training, and intelligence all aligned. The Hedgehog succeeded because it solved the fundamental tactical problem that had plagued anti-submarine warfare since submarines first became viable weapons. How do you attack a target you cannot see? The answer was not bigger explosions or faster ships or longer-range weapons. The answer was maintaining information. Keep your target on sonar. Fire ahead while you can still track. Use contact fuses to confirm hits. Attack again immediately if you miss. Never go blind. That principle, born in a requisitioned London hotel where retired officers and civilian engineers worked on unconventional weapons, transformed by Royal Navy trials aboard HMS Westcott, perfected in American production facilities, and demonstrated in combat by USS England, changed submarine warfare forever. The weapon looked primitive, bristling spigots firing finned projectiles that resembled oversized darts. But primitive does not mean ineffective. Hedgehog was lethally, demonstrably effective. May 19th through June 1st, 1944, 12 days that rewrote the tactical handbook. I-16, Row 106, Row 104, Row 116, Row 108, Row 105, 6 submarines, 6 captains, 369 Japanese submariners, all gone, all killed by a weapon that eliminated the blind period, that fired ahead, that exploded only on contact, that sank in 8 seconds instead of 20. The revolution was not announced with grand pronouncements or theoretical papers. It was written in the oil slicks and debris fields that marked where submarines died, in the sonar recordings that captured breaking up noises, in the combat reports filed by destroyer escort captains, who had discovered they could hunt and kill with unprecedented efficiency. USS England proved that destroyers were no longer prey waiting for submarines to attack. Destroyers were predators. When equipped with Hedgehog, trained properly, and supported by good intelligence, they could systematically destroy enemy submarine forces. The hunted became the hunters, and the mathematics of submarine warfare, those grim statistics from early 1942 showing 3% kill rates and 60 attacks per success, were rewritten in the waters north of Bougainville when 24 steel spigots fired ahead and struck home. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.